When it comes to meditation, because of the way that we live our lives, we tend to bring everything from outside within. So we often sit down to meditate to escape from our lives, but then we find as soon as we start to get a little bit quiet, a little bit more relaxed, everything that we're escaping from starts to come up. We could think that the meditation practice isn't working when this happens. But if we really look at it, it's a natural way of our brains purging everything that's been built up, for releasing it all. But if we want to release it properly, if we want to allow all this stuff to just flow through, we have to really be aware of our relationship to it. If we don't notice our relationship to it, you'll find you'll sit there, little thoughts and fantasies will come up and form off in those thoughts. It's school holidays at the moment, so it's noisier. Form off, talking about how you don't like the sound, how the sound disturbs your meditation. Yeah? Does this sound familiar? Or how uncomfortable it is on the chair? Or what I'm going to do after I leave here? All these sorts of things. But if you look at it, what we're starting to see is the 5 hindrances. We're seeing sensual desire. So sensual desire is coming up in our meditation practice in forms of thinking, of dreaming and fantasizing about pleasant things. In wanting to listen to conversations of people talking about in the hallway as they walk past. Yeah? It comes in wanting to experience the pleasantness in meditation practice itself. And then you've got the second one, ill will, aversion. It comes up of thinking how I can't meditate here because of this or that. I wish that sound would go away. I wish that other meditator would just be a little bit more still. Then I could concentrate. I wish my mind would just quieten down a little bit more and then I could meditate. Yeah? It also comes up as all the pains, the pain of our life. But you notice when our mind moves in this way towards sensual desire and towards aversion, past and future suddenly exists. It didn't exist before. When we're just sitting there relaxing, the feeling of past and future didn't exist. But as soon as we have that identification, this is too noisy because of, it would really be nice to have this happen again in my life. It'll be really good when I go here or there. Suddenly you find time has suddenly appeared. Can you see that? So when we're fully in the present moment, which we're trying to do in the meditation practice, what we're training, you haven't got that feeling of time. You'll find time disappears. But as soon as our mind identifies with something, as soon as it identifies, what happens? Time exists. Past and future exists. And things get very, very complicated. Since the mindfulness meditation practice is all about completely removing those 5 hindrances from our mind, temporarily at first during the practice, and at deeper levels of practice completely, right? Then what we need to do is we need to understand this identification which makes them exist. How does this work? Now, if we try to observe what we're thinking about, if we're feeling unpleasant emotions and we're trying to look at, okay, what's causing me to feel this way? Looking at it from that point of view, what we're doing is we're creating time, we're creating past and future, we're making it very, very complex. And looking at it from the view of a story, my life, you can never get to the end of it. It will never come to the end. Your mind will just keep creating. So that's why in meditation practice, we're not interested in the story. Each of our stories is different. What we're interested in is, as a human being, how do you experience the world? What can you actually know? So as a human being, all you can really know is what you experience, isn't it? If you aren't experiencing it at the moment, how can you know it exists? You can't. You can think about it, you can read about it, but you can't actually know it. So all we can deal with is what is present with us, present to us right now. Does that make sense so far? So in developing mindfulness, mindfulness needs an object. We need to be mindful of something. So mindfulness is remembering, I am aware of this right now. This is what is present to me. This is what I am aware of. Yeah? That's what mindfulness does. If mindfulness doesn't have an object, if we're not being mindful of something, then mindfulness cannot grow. The momentum of the mindfulness will not increase, and the strength of it won't increase. So when the mindfulness is weak, we sink back into very low awareness. When our awareness is low, the hindrances, the 5 hindrances, sensual desire, right, ill will, aversion, right, sleepiness, sluggishness of mind, mental restlessness, and doubt take over. They automatically take over when our awareness is very low. So it's important to develop mindfulness so we always know, I am aware of this. It needs a target, it needs accuracy, it needs aim. We need to specifically say this is what I'm looking at, not just anything, this. It's that fine honing of your accuracy that actually causes the mindfulness to increase, which then causes your awareness to increase, which then makes it easier to be with things which are difficult to be with. When the awareness is low, we drown in them. When the awareness is high, we can actually watch them without feeling any pain in watching them. And we can get to understand what's going on. So this is diving in and out of the level of what's called delusion, the inability to see what's really going on because our awareness is too low, and so we get lost in it. So increasing this factor of mindfulness is really important. The way the hindrances work against mindfulness is when any of the hindrances are present and we identify with them, mindfulness then no longer has an object. When we're lost in the hindrances, we're no longer mindful. When we're no longer mindful, mindfulness doesn't have an object, so the strength of the mindfulness can't increase. When the mindfulness is no longer present, the awareness drops back down again. And then we're lost in the whole cycle of suffering, if that makes sense. This is the way it works. The trick to this is to make the hindrances themselves, when they're present, the object of meditation. Right? And this is what we need to do. This gives us something to hone the accuracy of our mindfulness on. And it doesn't matter which one is present. They're all very valid objects of meditation. That's why I'd say, start off watching the breathing. We're doing that to build up concentration, basically. As soon as our attention gets dragged off to something, boom, there's a hindrance present. So in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha talked about when the hindrances are present, there's actually a section just on them, all for themselves. And he says, what we need to do in our practice is we need to know when the hindrances are present. There might actually be all 5 present at the same time, or there might be 1 present. But we also need to know when they're not present. So you might know when you're feeling aversive, but do you know when there's no aversion present? You might know when there's doubt there, but do you know what it feels like when there's no doubt? You might know what it feels like when it's sleepy, but do you know what it feels like not to feel sleepy? This is just as important. So we're always honing our mindfulness on something. Yeah? So the hindrances actually stop the mindfulness from developing, and then stop the concentration from developing. So they stop our meditation practice. In that letting go practice, you might have found you started to let go to a certain point, and then it just wouldn't go any further. There would be a hindrance present, 100%. So you need to know which one is there. There's something stopping you. Yeah? And it could be aversion. It might be just the very fear of relaxing deeply and letting go of control. Yeah? Can you see how they work? So the first thing that we need to do if we're going to do this practice is we need to be able to spot them. So I keep repeating them because I want you to learn them. Sensual desire. This is the longing for anything other than what's here at the present moment. So we want something other than what's here. Right? Ill will, aversion. We don't want what's here, we want something else. Notice how they both exist at exactly the same time. Two sides of the same coin. Those two there, as I mentioned last week, are what we can actually refine in our everyday life. They are actually morality based. The way we live our life, the way we interact with life, either strengthens them or weakens them. So if you want to weaken them in your life, start to look at the way you're relating to life and relating to others and relating to yourself. They're exercised. Those two are exercised. 100%. The next two, sleepiness, sluggishness of mind, and restlessness, two sides of the same coin. One is not placing any interest in what's happening right now. That's why we feel sleepy. We're not placing interest in what's happening. Restlessness, right? Putting too much effort into what's happening. Yeah? And last one is doubt. Doubt in your own ability to do the practice. Doubt in the practice you're doing. Doubt in your teacher. Doubt that meditation even works in the first place. You often see people who doubt. A very clear one to see is they'll go from one meditation class to another meditation class to another meditation class. Or almost spiritual seekers going from one technique to another technique to another technique to another technique to another technique. Yeah? The problem with doing this is they don't realise that the hindrance of doubt is in their mind, and it will continue. It's like running around the base of a mountain instead of just taking one path and just saying, okay, there's many paths to the top, which one should I take? I'll just stick with this one. And so go around in circles and circles and circles and never develop anything. It's nasty. Doubt is nasty. But also in the development of mindfulness practice, it's actually the first one to get completely uprooted at Sotapanna. Very interesting. It's the first one that gets uprooted from the mind. Yeah. So in doing this, we need to learn to spot them, to understand them. So when you're doing your meditation practice and you find, oh, I've wandered off from the breathing, then go, okay, what hindrance is present? Try to work out what hindrance is present. The very effort of trying to work out what it is breaks you from that identification with the whole story around it. It might be a thought, it might be a sound, it might be anything, but there's going to be a relationship to that. There's going to be something driving the mind to move. The mind moved because it wanted something. Your attention moved because it was after something. So what drove it? What's the driving factor? It's one of those hindrances, or all five maybe, if you're very lucky. So what it does is the hindrances because we identify them with so much, they create what's called delusion. And in this delusion, the Buddha said, what we do is this is the way we think about stuff. When we have a thought, or we have a pain in our knee, or we hear a sound or whatever, we think, this is mine, I am this is myself. We have this identification. This is mine, I am this is myself. And that's that feeling, that I feeling, that feeling of identification. So for your meditation practice to develop, we need to look at things in a way that doesn't generate that feeling of identification. Because when we identify with something, we're lost in it. Right? I'm feeling aversion, or I'm feeling anxiety. As soon as I go, this is me, I am anxious. As soon as that thought comes up, I am anxious, boom, gone, lost. But it's possible to just experience the sensations of anxiety without thinking I am anxious. The difference between the two is one contains suffering, one doesn't. If we look at something, a way to break through this process, what we've got to do is look into things in terms of process rather than just what's there. There's always a process there. So at the moment, I still have a flu. So itchy lungs, itchy throat, painful feelings in the body, dull, cloggy mind. Yeah? Right? So how would I look at that in terms of the hindrances and process? If I'm sitting here and I'm going, oh, I am sick. I'm really sick. I don't want to be sick. I've got so many things to do. I wish this sickness would go away. This sound familiar, train of thought? We think that a lot, don't we, when we're sick? So basically what we're saying, this is what's happening now and I don't want it to happen. So which hindrances come up? Second one, aversion, ill will. What else is also there? Sensual desire, because we want to be well. We don't want to be sick, right? And notice the other ones come up when you're sick too. The jumping between sleepiness and restlessness. Yeah? And also the fear through doubt of not knowing whether you're going to get better or not. Yeah? So all 5 hindrances can appear when you're sick. But notice it when you feel a sickness coming on, you go, oh, I am sick. Notice how you suddenly feel sicker. It's like the sickness suddenly gets a hold. Why? Because all your energy is feeding it. But let's look at it a different way. How can you look at this sickness to break away that part of the suffering part of the sickness? Because just because we're sick doesn't mean we've got to suffer. How we do that is we break up the process. So instead, what's the process? Well, there's unpleasant sensations in the body. Right? So there's sensations. Not even unpleasant sensations. There's sensations. The next stage is they're unpleasant. I don't like the unpleasantness. Right? Because I don't like the unpleasantness, I want to get away from them. So that's desire. From the desire comes up aversion, the emotion of aversion, trying to get away. From the aversion comes up the thinking, right? I am sick, I don't want to be sick, I want to be better. And then the whole thing cycles on that upper level, trying to get away from these sensations. But if you start looking at it, start off with the thinking, start off with that obsessive thought. Then notice that obsessive thought is being driven by something. Aversion. Aversion to the illness. Notice the aversion is being driven by desire. The desire is being driven by dislike. The dislike is being driven by unpleasantness. Unpleasantness is a conditioned response dependent on how you've been relating to similar experiences in the past. At the highest level of practice, you have sensation, unpleasant. At the very highest level of practice, you just have sensation. At the level of sensation and then unpleasantness, there is no time. As soon as we dislike the unpleasantness, and the sensations, suddenly time appears and someone who is feeling unpleasant. And then the person is created. So in meditation practice, as you hone your accuracy, you can go back to the point before the feeling of me or I is created. And the Buddha called this looking in terms of, this is not mine, I am not this is not myself. He said that was helpful. And anybody who's watched thinking in their meditation practice will start to realize, hey, I've got no control over it, it's not me. And that feeling of it being you becomes weaker and weaker. So can you see how the process goes? At the highest level of practices, when the hindrances aren't there, we're fully present. There's just sensations. And even at the lower level, there's sensations, unpleasant. Unpleasant is the point in which you cut the chain. But you cannot make that unpleasant disappear, because that unpleasant is karma. That unpleasant has been conditioned by the way you've related to a situation in the past. So you will feel and judge that sensation based on your past relationship. Now this is the same to do with anger-based states of mind. If you're angry at someone, same thing. You hear something or see something you don't like, unpleasant, dislike, desire, aversion, thinking, full-blown anger, physical attack. Speaking, physical attack. It's the same process. Same for longing, lust. You see, pleasant feeling, you want the pleasant feeling, you like it, you desire it, desire it, right? The craving comes up and suddenly you feel full-blown lust. The lust drives the thinking works out how you can get it. Very, very interesting. So that's what we're doing in the practice. So this is how you break it down from identifying with to pulling it apart. So in the practice, what we want to do is start looking at the process, cut it back. You'll notice the thinking will be the most obvious thing that will come up. There's always something driving the thinking. Look at that. Then see if you can track it backwards. Once you can get to the point of, right, one of the sense doors contacting an object, so seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling through the body, or something in the mind, thinking or whatever, as soon as you get to that point there will be a pleasant or unpleasant feeling tone called Vedana. If you can cut it off and catch that, the whole process doesn't exist. If you cut it off at the unpleasant feeling, right, dislike doesn't exist, right? If dislike doesn't exist, right, then desire doesn't exist, the craving doesn't exist. That doesn't exist, the aversion doesn't exist. The aversion doesn't exist, the thinking doesn't exist. The thinking doesn't exist, the acting on doesn't exist. So this is how you can cut off processes. And this is where you'll see people quite advanced in the practice. They're not suffering. Why? Because they're cutting it off at pleasant or unpleasant, which they can't control because that's coming from the past conditioning. But you cut at that point, as the Buddha said, the whole mass of suffering ends. And so literal meaning of nibbana in everyday life is cutting it off at that point. You cut it off at that point through strong mindfulness, just being mindful of that. The whole idea, I am sick, you have wronged me, or I really want you, never comes up. It doesn't even arise. Very, very interesting.